blessed good morning to all of you who have tuned in. Welcome to all the CEAP member schools from all over the Philippines. I'm Tessa De Vella from the Mira College Women and Gender Institute, the moderator for today. The webinar just before this one tackled the topic mobilizing our youth and forming engaged citizens, which essentially talked about the importance of the youth in upholding democracy in the Philippines, a democracy which, according to our speakers, is being railroaded by self-serving politicians. So the speakers, Mr. Leonel Flores and Dr. Paul Lasco, impressed the importance of voting wisely, the importance of the youth's political participation, and the youth's leadership for a better Philippine democracy. So hopefully our young people there, women and men, were inspired and motivated by that webinar. For today, we have the last of a series of webinars of the 2021 CEAP-JEEPGY National Conference. And today's webinar is titled, "It's All About Love, Ending Gender-Based Violence with Care, Respect, Empowerment." And aptly, of course, it's being held on the first day of the Love Month. So advance happy Valentine's to everyone. We will, of course, begin with an opening prayer. And I've selected a prayer that I think is quite suitable for the theme of our webinar. And we would also like to dedicate this prayer to our Maryknoll sister, Sister Mayang Bruno, who passed just yesterday. In the name of the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Bless us with love, O merciful God, that we may love you, that we may love as you love, that we may show patience, tolerance, kindness, caring, and love to all. Give us knowledge, O giver of knowledge, that we may be one with our universe and Mother Earth. O compassionate one, grant compassion unto us, that we may help all our fellow souls in need. Bless us with your love, O God. Bless us with your love. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. So that prayer is actually composed by an unknown author, so I hope you liked it. Now, okay, according to my script, we have to go to some reminders, very important reminders. So first, as this talk is ongoing, we encourage you to post your questions or comments at the comment section on Facebook and YouTube, and we will read the questions or comments during the Q&A portion. We really hope to hear from you. The second important announcement is please be informed that you will receive a certificate of attendance upon completion of the evaluation form. The link has already been posted as part of the caption of this video, both on YouTube and Facebook. But please note that the link will only go live at 11:30 a.m. until 5 p.m. today. So if you click it now, it's not going to open. Once you have answered the evaluation form, however, you should receive your certificate of attendance within 3 to 5 days. This webinar is a free webinar brought to you in partnership with the Private Education Assistance Committee. These webinars are free, but if you want to pay it forward, you may donate to the Kapatirang Kamagong Fund, of a CEAP fund for helping the poor and struggling CEAP mission schools. And lastly, we encourage you to share this webinar to your networks with the hashtag CEAP Cares and hashtag I Love Catholic Ed. So like, subscribe, and share. So, okay, let's get started on our discussion for this morning, entitled It's All About Love, Ending Gender-Based Violence with Care, Respect, Empowerment. A little bit about, just an overview about our discussion this morning. The webinar will focus on unpacking gender-based violence, or GBV, and addressing the issue from a discourse of love. A love discourse is carried by many scholars and Catholics, including Pope Francis, to address the challenging social issues, many challenging social issues, such as gender-based violence. Through a semi-structured conversation, so we really hope to get lots of questions and comments with the CEAP community. This webinar seeks to critically understand the gendered culture of violence that continues to prevail in the Philippines, in Philippine schools, in Philippine communities, and the world at large, and how love can serve as the best counter discourse to ending gender-based violence. So the first presentation is by Sister Helen Graham from the Maryknoll Sisters of St. Dominique, who will focus on why a framework of love is the best counter discourse to gender-based violence, most especially for Catholic schools, but for people in general. The second presentation from Professor Pacita, Dechavez, Fortin, from the Miriam College Women and Gender Institute, intends on answering what is gender-based violence and why does it prevail. The third and last presentation is from Dr. Mira Ofreneo from the Ateneo de Manila University Loyola School's Gender Hub. And she shares how a love care discourse can translate to and influence gender responsive administrative policies and practices or processes. So I want to thank all of our speakers for being here this morning. I know you're all extremely busy, so thank you for finding the time to prepare your presentations and to deliver them today. So I'll begin by introducing our first speaker, Sister Helen Graham. Sister Helen of the Maryknoll Sisters of St. Dominique originally hails from Brooklyn, New York, but has spent most of her life in the Philippines on mission, that is since 1967. So sister, I wasn't even born yet. So Maryknoll Sisters are known as trailblazers. And for Sister Helen, this would include being involved in establishing the Task Force Detainees of the Philippines to assist political prisoners in the early 1970s, a time when such organizations were banned. At her core, Sister Helen is a teacher of sacred scriptures and social justice. She has done this teaching sacred scriptures and social justice in schools and seminars across the Philippines, in workshops and conferences across the globe. And for more than 50 years now, Sister Helen continues to regularly teach at the Institute of Formation and Religious Studies. I could tell you about her impressive academic credentials and awards that would leave you in awe. But instead, I'll just say, Google Sister Helen, because Sister Helen is worth the read. So without further delay, welcome Sister Helen. The floor is yours.
The topic given to me is to provide some insight into love as a framework for addressing gender-based violence as Catholics. Many biblical passages speak of love. It is a central concept in Old and New Testament. There is God's love for Israel, Israel's love for God, the love of friendship between man and man, woman and woman, woman and man, the love of a mother for the child of her womb, and many more. In the very middle of our Old Testament, for example, is an erotic poem or series of poems describing the love between a young woman and a young man. One can only wonder how it became part of our Bible. But in a bold use of metaphor, it became a description of the covenant between God and people. In the New Testament, it is used to describe Jesus and the church. The Song of Songs offers a description of love in its final chapter. Bind me as a seal upon your heart, a sign upon your arm. For love is fierce as death, its jealousy bitter than the grave. Even its sparks are a raging fire, a devouring flame. Great seas cannot extinguish love. No river can sweep it away. If a man tries to buy love with all the wealth of his house, he would be despised. It is the prophet Hosea from the mid-8th century who was the first to take the bold and audacious step of describing the relationship between God and people in terms of a marriage relationship, presenting Israel's failure in the relationship as breaking of a marriage covenant, as adultery for which Israel will be punished. Plead with your mother, plead, for she is not my wife, nor am I her husband. Let her therefore put away her harlotry from her sight, and her adulteress from between her breasts, lest I strip her naked and set her as on the day she was born, and make her a wilderness, and set her like a dry land, and slay her with thirst. Such punishment reflects the cultural and historical context of the period of Hosea's preaching. If the text is read in its cultural and historical context, it is possible to transcend the patriarchal imagery that was part of the culture of the times, even as we realize that the threat of such punishment continues to exist even in our own time. Without awareness of context, the text can seem to legitimate or give permission for domestic violence against women. Even in 2021, our official church still presents women as not quite equal to men. A fact that is starkly exemplified in the fact that women are barred from ordination in the Roman Catholic Church and have no role in decision-making in Rome. Pope John Paul II presents women and men as equal in creation, making use of the creation narrative of Genesis. When it comes to the Eucharist, however, women are no longer equal to men. Christ is the bridegroom. The bridegroom, the Son, consubstantial with the Father, as God became the Son of Mary. He became the Son of Man, true man, a male. The symbol of the bridegroom is masculine. This masculine symbol represents the human aspect of the divine love which God has for Israel, for the church, and for all people. It is the Eucharist, above all, that expresses the redemptive act of Christ, the bridegroom, toward the church, the bride. This is clear and unambiguous when the sacramental ministry of the Eucharist, in which the priest acts in persona Christi, is performed by a man. This continued status of women in the Roman Catholic Church as not quite equal to men helps to perpetuate similar understandings of women in society. Love is sung and written about by popes, poets, mystics, and theologians. A popular song from the mid-50s, when I was a teenager, but later became the title of a movie, describes love poetically. Love is a many splendid thing. It's April rose that only grows in the early spring. Love is nature's way of giving, a reason to be living. True love is a many splendid thing. Many splendid indeed. In his first encyclical, Deus Caritas Est, God is Love, Pope Benedict XVI observes that today the term love has become one of the most frequently used and misused of words, a word to which we attach quite different meanings. Pope Francis speaks of God's tenderness that leads us to understand that love is the meaning of life. When people feel truly loved, they feel able to love too. He continued, furthermore, if God is infinite tenderness, then people created in God's image are capable of tenderness too. The Hebrew word for tenderness comes from a root that means soft. And so the noun means womb, which is a soft place for the fetus to grow. So it really describes God's love as womb love, which is the love only a mother could have for her child. If a child is truly loved by the mother in the early months of life, psychologists say that the child has a good head start in life. One must first feel loved by one's parents, especially the mother, before one can grow to appreciate the love or tenderness of God. We have no other way to experience the divine except through what belongs to the human sphere. Once, when Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment was, he responded with the love commandment, consisting of 2 quotations from the Torah. One of the scribes came near and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, he asked him, "Which commandment is the greatest of all?" Jesus answered, "The first is, 'Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." These words attributed to Jesus actually summarize the 10 words or commandments heard at Sinai. One is enjoined to love God in the first 3 words or commandments, that is, to have no other God, to respect God's name, and to observe the Sabbath, and to live in such a way that one shows love for the neighbor. Do not kill, do not commit adultery, do not lie, steal, bear false witness, or inordinately desire what belongs to the neighbor. The Shema commands us to love God. Commentators have wrestled with the question of whether love can be commanded. In Deus Caritas Est, that is, God is love, Pope Benedict XVI addressed this question. 2 questions arise concerning our own attitude. Can we love God without having seen God? And can love be commanded? The unbreakable bond between love of God and love of neighbor is emphasized. One is so closely connected to the other that to say that we love God becomes a lie if we are closed to our neighbor or hate him or her altogether. St. John's words should rather be interpreted to mean that love of neighbor is a path that leads to the encounter with God, that closing our eyes to our neighbor also blinds us to God. Writers of different periods of history provide descriptions of love in behavioral terms. For example, Paul offers a description in his famous ode to love in 1 Corinthians. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. In words that recall the words of Paul, the Lebanese Maronite Catholic poet-philosopher Karl Gibran describes love in these words. Love gives naught but of itself, and takes naught but from itself. Love possesses not, and would not be possessed. For love is sufficient unto love. And think not that you can direct the course of love, for love, if it finds you worthy, will direct your course. Love has no other desire but to fulfill itself. But if you love and must have desire, let these be your desires, to melt and be like a running brook that sings its melody to the night, to know the pain of too much tenderness. Yes, love is a many splendid thing. Love is central to biblical life and faith. I believe it's actually central to human life. We learn to love by experiencing love, and by experiencing ourselves as capable of loving. But how does one learn to love genuinely and maturely? I'm not a psychologist, but as I look out at the world and even at my own personal life, it seems there is so much activity that falls short of love. I don't know the statistics, but some say that at least 1 out of 3 marriages end in separation or divorce. These are folks who fell in love once, but who can no longer sustain that love. The statistics for domestic violence are very high in every level of society, even higher in this time of COVID-19 lockdown. Again, these are also couples who fell in love once, but who are unable to sustain close proximity without violence. Overwhelmingly, it is women who are the recipients of acts of domestic violence. As I suggested above, the persistent presentation of women by the official church helps in some way for such a climate to continue. Joan Chittister offers a stark comment on love gone awry in her chapter on adultery in her book, The 10 Commandments. Disregard for the relationship, exploitation of the partnership, anarchistic victimization of another, sexually, emotionally, psychologically, for the sake of self is a violation of the 6th commandment. It is sexual abuse of the worst kind. So many of our young women longing for genuine love and relationship get involved in what Tamara Eskenazi terms premature knowledge. In the context of the biblical story of the man and woman in the garden, she writes that the story cautions us about the danger of premature knowledge, a message especially pertinent to our own day, where knowledge as information is easily separable from maturity. The Hebrew word for knowledge, yada, speaks of experiential knowledge. It is the word used for sexual intimacy in the scripture. After their expulsion from the garden, we read that, now the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. We of the adult community seem unable to be of genuine assistance to our youth, as in their hunger for genuine love and intimacy, they get themselves tangled up in premature knowledge, and are thus possibly destined to perpetuate the problem for the next generation. Many experience various types of violence, including psychological and sexual violence, as well as physical violence. Some are even raped by men in whose company they expected to be respected and safe. If we are to speak of passion here, it is the arrogant passion of the self for whom no other exists, in her own subjectivity, her own readiness to open doors or leave them closed. Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg, in her commentary on the weekly Torah portions from Genesis, continues her commentary describing sexual behavior of the generation that precipitated the flood as a sexuality of rapacious egotism, exemplifying not an act of love, but an act of robbery. The worst thing you can do to somebody is not to make her scream in agony, but to use that agony in such a way that even when the agony is over, she cannot reconstruct herself. You can thereby unmake her world by making it impossible for her to use language to describe what she has been. We have heard scripture writers, popes, poets, and theologians speak eloquently of the power, beauty, and centrality of genuine love in human and Christian life. We have also heard of behavior not motivated by mature love, but by an egotism which blatantly violates the other's subjectivity, crosses the threshold, disrespects the door which she is free to open or keep closed. As educators and administrators, we are challenged, limited as we are, to make great efforts to produce policies aimed at contributing to bringing about change in this culture of violence. It is not new, but the growing awareness and consciousness concerning this evil scourge over the past decades is new. The fact that the CEAP is having a webinar on the subject demonstrates the seriousness of the situation. There is no easy solution to the age-old reality, but each of us must consciously contribute to changing the culture that promotes it. As we've tried to show, popes, poets, mystics, and theologians have spoken and written elegantly and profoundly about love as central to biblical faith and life. Biblical and theological understanding is essential if we are to move the discourse to gender-responsive administrative policies and processes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Helen. Our second speaker is Professor Pacita Dechavez Fortin. Professor Pacita Dechavez Fortin, who we fondly call Prof. Bing, originally hails from Bicol, but has spent most of her professional life in Loyola Heights, Quezon City, in particular Miriam College. That is after completing her graduate studies at the International Institute of Social Studies in the Netherlands. She is currently the chairperson of the Miriam College Department of Social Work, as well as lecturer with the Miriam College Department of International Studies and the Department of Psychology. Prof. Bing takes an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approach in all her undertakings, as a social worker, as an educator, and as an administrator. Prof. Bing is among the international gender consultants of UN Women Philippines, and we're very proud to say, currently WAGI's faculty associate for training. Welcome, Prof. Bing. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, CEAP, for this opportunity to share about the topic ending gender-based violence in the Philippines. This morning, I will be talking about unpacking rape culture. A few days ago, a friend of mine called me to ask whether I'm still providing psychosocial support services to women survivors of violence. She informed me that a 5-year-old girl was raped by a 32-year-old relative during the lockdown. This case is just one of the many cases I've handled as a social worker for the past 2 decades. And of course, we've heard news reports of rape, marital rape, incest rape, wife battering, child abuse happening within homes and also online for purposes of sexual exploitation. Also, we hear of emotional, psychological, and economic abuse. During the lockdown, the Philippine National Police has reported that they have received 12,500 cases of gender-based violence incidents from March 15 to October 31, 2020. These incidents include violations of RA 92, Republic Act 9262, the Violence Against Women and Their Children, cases of rape, acts of lasciviousness, violations of anti-photo and video voyeurism, violation of Anti-Trafficking Act, the Safe Spaces Act, and sexual harassment. In the Philippines, the top 5 regions, according to the PNP, with the highest incidence of GBV from the same period are the following. Region 7, Central Visayas, NCR, Region 6, Western Visayas, Region 4A, Calabarzon, Region 13, Caraga. So here you could see that Region 7 has the highest recorded GBV cases of 1,762 or 38%. Before the quarantine in 2020, PNP received about 3,700 plus cases. And during the start of the lockdown, 2,500. And here in this data, you could also see that if you compare the cases of GBV this year, 2020 cases as compared to last year, you would see that the numbers are lower. The PNP data do not indicate an increase in VAU cases during the quarantine period. However, this does not mean that VAU has gone down. It is just that the decrease in reported cases may be attributed to, restrictions brought about by quarantine regulations, which led to restriction in movement in communities, the suspension of public transportation. You have victims being monitored by perpetrators 24/7, so most probably living with them. Lack or limited online communication channels where reporting could be made, and limited or lack of information on where on how to report. So these prevented victim survivors to report cases, which could have resulted to the lower number. Figures can actually be higher according to the PNP, as there are also other cases being reported to non-government organizations, faith-based institutions, barangays, women, children protection units in hospitals, local social welfare development offices, and other service agencies that are not covered by this PNP's report. This data shows to us the extent and the magnitude of the problem that we are confronted with. As I have mentioned, I have been working on this issue for the past 20 years that I've been a social worker, and I've always been bothered why every year we still see thousands of women, children being victims of gender-based violence in its different forms. And the answer is rape culture. No. So rape culture is a general term for any culture in which rape, sexual violation, and other sexist, misogynistic, homophobic, or transphobic beliefs and behaviors are normalized and not challenged. So these are complex set of beliefs which promote, encourage sexual aggression, and also trivializes cases of sexual violence when this occur. So rape culture is an explanation of why gender-based violence in the Philippines continue to persist until this time. For us to be able to advocate for ending gender-based violence in the Philippines, we need to understand its anatomy, its internal workings. And here you would see that it is rooted in this deeply held attitudes and beliefs on how men and women should behave towards each other, assigning them to traditional roles that continue to discriminate women, that provides a justification why different forms of violence committed against them would occur. These attitudes and beliefs could be manifested in verbal expressions of violence, such as harassment, threats, verbal abuse, jokes that are sexist, homophobic, transphobic. Also, locker room talk, no, victim blaming, catcalling. So these are examples of verbal expressions of violence, and another brick that builds this rape culture is removal of autonomy. Depriving victim survivors of their capacity to make decisions, use of coercion, use of threats, which somehow creates a condition through which explicit forms of violence, those forms of violence where you can see the wounds, where you can see where the pain is visible. No, so rape, incest, battery, domestic violence, hate crimes, and murder. So here you could see that if you want to put an end to gender-based violence, we need to challenge, change these attitudes and beliefs that continue to perpetuate gender-based violence and rape culture. What are those beliefs, or what is endemic to rape culture? Beliefs that encourage sexual aggression and support violation against women. Beliefs that says that men has strong sexual appetites, and that they think of sex all the time, and that they need sex all the time, and that men are tough, and they need to defend their reputation. If there is a need for that, then they can use force. And here you can see a picture, of how domestic violence is normalized on this ad now. And this belief of sexual aggression in males and the sexual passivity in females is rooted in biology. It's believed to be rooted in biology. And because it is believed to be determined by biology and therefore cannot be changed. So here also in this photo, we could see that there are stereotypes of males and females often attributed to their sex. So if you're not, if you don't manifest these attributes or these traits, you are not man or woman enough. And if you break these stereotypes, you could either be punished through different forms of violence. You could be humiliated, you could be socially isolated, you could be sexually violated or assaulted, so that you will conform to these stereotypes. Beliefs that rape is an expression of sexual desire rather than one of power, control, and anger. Rape is coerced, forced sex, period. And this belief that rape is an expression of sexual desire could be, and rape, this perception of this naturalization of violence in of sex in media could be seen in advertisements such as this one by Dolce and Gabbana. So there is also this inaccurate images of violence as a natural part of sex now, as if violence would lend thrill and excitement to relationships. The promotion and persistence of rape myths, statements such as beliefs that only promiscuous women get raped, and that all rapists are monsters, all rape is violent. So the use of this racist, classist, sexist, misogynistic, homophobic, or transphobic stereotypes and false or biased information about rape, those victim survivors of rape, and those who commit rape or sexual violence. Also, myth of Maria Clara, which also perpetuate rape myth. No, Maria Clara as a model for Filipinas. They're meek, they're subservient, they're passive, and they're beautiful. And some believe that women who embody this Maria Clara feature they are impervious to sexual violation or rape. And conversely, um, this interpretation will also argue that women who are not like Maria Clara, who are independent, opinionated, and strong, deserve any form of sexual violation that they experience. Objectification of women or women's bodies as an object of men's desire, reducing them to a body part or a tool for the objectifier's purpose, treating them according to how they look and robbing them of autonomy, self-determination, boundaries, feelings, or capacity to speak. A human person reduced to an object. Victim blaming, holding someone responsible for the experience of sexual violation that they have experienced. It's as if that they have invited, they have encouraged the violation that happened to them. This extends to comments or questions about survivor's clothing. Ano ba kasi ang damit mo? Ang ikli-ikli ng damit mo. As you could see here in the post of the Lokban police station about what women are wearing, being drunk or high, being out and about at night or in dangerous areas, also questioning about the relationship with the perpetrator or their occupation. We've heard, for example, when Christine Becerra was killed, and statements about bakit kasi sumama siya doon sa sampung lalaki. This is victim blaming, and this is one of the feature of rape culture. This is how rape culture is made evident in our society. Sympathy, inappropriate or disproportionate sympathy received by those who perpetuate misogyny and commit acts of sexual violation, usually expressed as excuses for perpetrators. When victim survivors would disclose, and we hear statements such as, he didn't mean it, he was just drunk, he was going through a difficult time in his life. If you report this case, you will ruin his career, his life, his family, his future. These statements minimize the effect of the experience of sexual violation of those who were victims, and overemphasizes the effect of being held accountable of the crimes they have committed on the part of the perpetrator. So despite being internationally acclaimed as one of the most gender equal countries in the world, the Philippines hide in its underbelly a cultural foundation that lends itself to rape culture. How does rape culture manifest in the Philippines? As I presented to you earlier, cases of sexual violence and rape. For me, one case is bad enough. We need to come together and address it. Very few women also, and other survivors of violence, would seek legal redress for the crime committed against them. Based on research, less than 25% of those who experience rape or other forms of sexual violation would report and file a case, and only 0.5% of perpetrators are held accountable. So there is little or no justice for survivors, and there's little or no consequences to perpetrators of violence. Victim blaming, it's the victim's fault. She asked for it. And but we know that cases of rape and and sexual violation happens when someone decides to commit rape. Machismo, exaggerated displays of masculinity, seeking constant validation of their superiority through aggression, either physical or sexual, and the continued derogation of anything associated with femininity, and which are deemed acceptable and are expected among males. Boys only cliques, these are groups of young males where they imbibe, the macho culture, where members consciously or unconsciously rehearse and seek validation for their masculinity, and these became echo chambers of toxic masculinity. And research shows that sex desegregated schools, such as all boys schools, can increase gender stereotyping and legitimize institutional sexism. Heteronormativity, which assumes that heterosexual relationships, those between males and females, are normal, and that everything else is irregular or an aberration, a disease that must be cured. No. So I remember this one case that that happened in the community, a lesbian who was gang raped. Uh, and the men were saying that they were simply trying to correct or punish, correct, yung being a lesbian, and it's a punishment for nag-aastang lalaki, So these are examples of heteronormativity, and also, of course, yung words that we use to humiliate and shame LGBTQ people, especially those with feminine, like bakla as a slur. So what can be done to change rape culture? I'm saying that rape culture is rooted in the attitudes and beliefs that perpetuate sexual violation and other forms of violence. So therefore, there is a need for us to promote societal norms. Let's put an end to bystander phenomenon. Intervene when sexual violence happen. Ask questions, report these cases. Men and boys should be mobilized as allies. They themselves should recognize words or behaviors that can contribute to rape culture, and that they will call out or change these words or behaviors. Masculinity should be redefined, where men and boys are encouraged to feel and act beyond the rigid expectations set for them, and to be able to express negative emotions more positively than through aggression and anger. There's a need to teach and learn skills to prevent sexual violation. For women and men to learn about healthy sexuality, safe dating, and intimate relationship skills. They should learn to communicate attraction, their need for, and the need to provide affection, and to express this discomfort when boundaries are breached. A need to provide opportunities to empower women and girls. Poverty makes women and girls more vulnerable to sexual exploitation or violence. It also prevents women from leaving abusive relationships. So there is a need to provide economic support for women, poverty alleviation measures, scholarship opportunities, so that sexual violence, other forms of violence would be prevented. Leadership opportunities that will highlight, showcase women's capacities, abilities, and further develop their confidence and the drive and skill set to tackle problems that matter to them, and not only those problems that are thrown at them. This must be provided. Create protective environments where there is zero tolerance for sexual violation and other forms of violence. Making sure that anti-sexual violation policies are in place and that they are working effectively. Legal and health and social services should be affordable, accessible, and friendly to people who need them, and that family members and peers know how to prevent sexual violation, encouraging openness about consent and boundaries. The need to support people who experience sexual violation. They have experienced a lot of trauma, and it takes courage to tell others about their experiences, and therefore they must be supported so they feel safe enough to heal. How do we put an end to rape culture? We need to create a counterculture, a culture that will uphold the human dignity, the rights, the humanity of every human person. A culture of love where there is caring, where there is respect, where there is empowerment. Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Prof. Bing. Our third and last speaker for this morning is Dr. Mira Ofreneo. She originally hails from UP Village, Quezon City, still resides there and probably will live there all her life. She's associate professor at the psychology department of Ateneo de Manila University, where she was the former chairperson of that same department. Dr. Mira's students, colleagues, and clients will tell you she is a committed teacher, a rigorous researcher, and an empathic counselor. Currently, Dr. Mira is also the founding director of the Ateneo Loyola School's Gender Hub, which was only established 2 years ago. But when you learn about the amazing work of the Gender Hub, led by Dr. Mira, you would think it has been around for 10 years. Without further ado, I give the floor to Dr. Mira Ofreneo.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for allowing me to be here to share with you today. As Tessa introduced us, the Loyola School's Gender Hub of Ateneo de Manila University is fairly new. We were born August 1, 2019. And we were created through a policy that the Loyola schools passed in December 2018. And today, I will share a little bit the story of how we created a gender policy in Ateneo, one that wishes to be gender responsive, gender inclusive, and gender safe. And in this presentation, and as we have been doing in our training of teachers, students, staff, employees in Ateneo, we have framed our work as strengthening an ethics of care and respect. And this is how we've tried to adopt our love discourse, following the call to love, the Catholic call to love, and locating it in our own context as a Filipino Catholic and Jesuit university, and integrating it with our work, anchored on a feminist ethics of care, in response to cases of sexual and gender-based violence. So let me begin by acknowledging that, as shared by Professor Bing, that indeed the problem is huge. It is beyond our own school settings. The problem of sexual harassment, gender-based violence, and discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression are wider issues in society, in the world. And our school, our own schools, universities, are located, embedded in this wider context. And so we always begin by recognizing that we live inside that wider society where gender inequality is systemic and gender-based violence is normative. What we have tried to do in Ateneo and in the Loyola schools is to recognize our ethical responsibility to respond to these gender issues. I always quote a particular Jesuit, Filipino Jesuit, when we were engaging in a discussion on how we can address gender-based violence, discrimination on the basis of SOGI in our school in Ateneo. And he said that it's about time that we recognize the marginalized narratives of women and LGBT people if we are to truly embrace and to truly embody a faith that does justice for all. So again, to remember that this is the issue we confront. Gender-based violence is so prevalent and so pervasive. And the number I always return to is 1 in 3. 1 in 3 women and girls in the world will experience violence in their lifetime. And that can have a huge impact on women and girls, even possibly leading to mental health conditions, to health problems, to self-harm, depression, anxiety, even suicide. In a study inside Quezon City, where Ateneo is located, no, the campus is located, sexual harassment, no, has been found to also be very prevalent, with 3 out of every 5 women reporting that they have been harassed. And 80% of young women age 18 to 24 reporting sexual harassment at least once. No? And in this study, actually, men would actually report that they do engage in harassment. No? Alongside these issues of sexual harassment, rape, sexual violence, is discrimination targeted towards lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender identifying people. In one particular study by UNESCO, they found that in some countries, up to 85% of LGBT students will experience some form of homophobic and transphobic violence. In a UNDP report, bullying and discrimination, again targeting LGBT students and teachers, appear to be rampant. And the sad reality is that given the stigma surrounding these diverse gender identities and sexual orientation, the stigma and discrimination in society, is then experienced internally, in terms of mental health conditions. And research has shown that LGBT people are one of the highest at-risk populations when it comes to mental health. We have LGBT people 3 times more likely to experience a mental health condition, 4 times more likely to attempt suicide, experience suicidality, engage in self-harm, and 2.5 times more likely to experience depression and anxiety. So we always begin by showing the bigger picture in our work, by showing what we need to respond to. And then we anchor that in a framework of ethics, of an ethics of care and respect. We always refer to our code of ethics as teachers, given that we are in an educational setting as colleges and universities. And then we draw from our feminist ethics of care, which calls us to respond to the needs of others. And in our own formulation of the call to love, following our Jesuit tradition, Ignatian tradition, returning to cura personalis, which is care for the whole person. And so the way we have adopted our response to gender-based violence is to anchor on our own values as a Filipino Catholic and Jesuit institution. So just returning quickly to some of these principles, we would locate this ethics in the code of ethics for teachers. If you look at the side on interactions with students and colleagues, there are 3 points here. Teachers have the duty to respect students and peers. Teachers have the duty to protect the privacy and confidentiality of their students and peers. And teachers need to act appropriately in a professional manner with students and their colleagues. So oftentimes we would then unpack this in a full training or a workshop for teachers on how they can imbibe this code of ethics. We tie that to our feminist ethics of care. And following Carol Gilligan, who happens to be a psychologist, this ethics of care is to listen to that voice, that voice of each person that we need to listen to and deserves to be heard with respect. And so always in our work, we remind people that we are called to care. And caring means paying attention. Caring means listening. Caring means responding. And we argue that caring is not specific to women. It is for all human beings. And so we anchor on this feminist ethics of care and link that to a Catholic ethics of respect, a Catholic ethics of care, and a Catholic call to love. If I may refer to the Father James Martin, who also happens to be a Jesuit, who has been a very strong advocate of practicing respect and care for LGBT people within the Catholic Church. No? He writes that respect means recognizing the LGBT community, recognizing them with respect, and accepting them as beloved children of God, letting them know that they are beloved children of God. Father James Martin goes beyond that, and he has actually written a book on building a bridge between the Catholic Church and the LGBT community, and he calls us to do better. He calls us to go beyond respect, sensitivity, and compassion because God wants more. God wants us to love. So we have really anchored our work on this call to love. And inside Ateneo, we tie this to cura personalis, which is care for the whole person, and the desire to make persons for others. And so this has been the motto of our Ateneo education, which is to love and to serve others. We also anchor this on the call made for Jesuit schools to align themselves in solidarity with women. This comes from Decree 14 GC 34 of the Society of Jesus, which instructs Jesuit institutions to explicitly teach the equality of women and men, support liberation movements, and give specific attention to violence against women. So there is that recognition. There is that recognition of, again, these marginalized narratives of women and LGBT people that need to be recognized within Jesuit institutions. And so what have we done? What have we done? This has been our journey, our story in Ateneo. And in December 2018, after engaging in discourse, in conversation, after hearing out our different stakeholders, different communities, listening to each other, we arrived at developing what we call our gender policy, which builds a gender inclusive, gender responsive, and gender safe community. You can actually find this in the Ateneo website as under the Loyola School's gender policy. And from that policy, the Gender Hub was born. My office, the Gender Hub was born. And our mission is to be the Center for Gender Responsiveness in the Loyola Schools, carrying that vision. Our vision stands for safeguarding the well-being of everyone, all members of our community, where we wish to make the community safe for everyone, that is free of sexual and gender-based violence, discrimination, and harassment. We wish for the community to be gender inclusive, to respect the right to self-identity, self-expression, to respect the diversity of gender and sexuality. And we wish to be gender responsive in our education. We anchor this again to our core Ignatian principles: respect for human dignity, respect for integrity of the body, and respect for diversity. Hoping that by fulfilling this, we are embodying a faith that does justice for all. And so our vision, a safe school. We want Ateneo to be a safe school where all members of the community are safe from sexual harassment and gender-based violence. We also want Ateneo to be an inclusive school where all members of the community are free from discrimination on the basis of their sexuality, their gender identity, and expression. And in our teaching, no, we want our teachers to be able to practice an ethics of respect, respecting sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression of every student and of colleagues. We want our teachers to practice care, to be sensitive and caring to students and personnel who may have experiences of gender-based violence. And we want our teachers to be able to respect the professional boundaries of teacher-student relationships. And so I will end with this. Usually, when we're about to put a workshop to a close, we ask people to reflect. We ask our teachers to reflect. How can we make our classrooms a safer space? How can we truly practice cura personalis, care for the whole person? How can we practice an ethics of care and respect? And we ask all members of our university this question: how can we make our university a safe space for all? How can we truly respond to these wider issues of gender-based violence and discrimination on the basis of sorcery? With that, I will end with this purple card, which we share with everyone. When people ask us, what do I do if I hear of someone, if I hear a friend, a student, a colleague who may have experienced harassment or gender-based violence? Our answer is give your all. Attend, give them attention, listen, and link. With that, I end my presentation, and thank you once again for allowing me to be here.
Okay, so we're back. That was such a wonderful input from all of our speakers. I think everyone would agree. I would want to open the floor for discussion now, and we also have comments and questions coming in, mainly questions and comments and greetings. a few from Sister Helen's fans, no, her students. We have here your students saying hello and how happy they are to see you. We have. I just want our speakers to know that right now we have practically the whole of the Philippines tuned in. No, this is the wonder of CEAP. No, and so while we wait for maybe, and of course, I'd like to greet Father Balonga of Dumaguete. He's also here, no? From the CEAP, I think, Board of Trustees. And of course, Father Iking is here with us as well, the head of our JEEPGY. So as we wait for questions to come in, I could see that many of you were also reacting to each other's input. So I thought maybe we could begin there. All of your presentations have basically showed us that gender-based violence is a systemic issue, and to end it, we need a systemic response. No. And so I would want to, and you came from all different perspectives, of course, and maybe we'll take the opportunity while our viewers are tuned in to hear from each of you in response to what you heard from your co-panelists. I suppose I will begin with Sister Helen, if that's okay with you, Sister. I could see that you were quite agitated, listening to your co-panelists as they were presenting. Would you like to respond to the input of Prof. Bing and
First, I'd like to
Mira?
say that it's a great honor for me to be in the midst of these two panelists. I was very impressed with their presentations and wishing that many, many students could see these presentations. So I'm hoping that this whole webinar will be available on YouTube so that it can be assigned to students, because the information and the commitment is palpable and I think very important to communicate, because this gender-based violence is not going to go away, especially within the church. Church people need to really hear these things because we still regard women as second class, really, not really equal to men. So that for me encourages this culture to continue. So thank you very much to both of you. I'm really honored to be with you.
Thank you, Sister. You actually mentioned that this is not a new issue when you were sharing your presentation, but what's new is the growing consciousness. So I think that's really where CEAP comes in as well, no, as Catholic educational schools. Can we hear maybe from Prof. Bing? In response to the other panelists, or elaborate anything you
Yes,
said?
this is really, I mean, when Tessa asked me to become part of this panel, I got really very excited because, I love this course is something, we often don't hear this when we talk about, addressing gender-based violence, because particularly we focus on the legal, all this set of different social services that we will provide to survivors, no. But I think we have to talk more about this, as a discourse, in creating this culture of love to put an end to gender-based violence. One of my reflections when I was preparing for this presentation is that the dehumanizing process that happens, that occur in a context of a violent relationship, where you reduce a human person to an object, an object that could be used, abused, disposed. No, not a human person. And I think we have to, put it at the forefront of it, challenging all these structures that dehumanize, and create the conditions that perpetuate, made it possible for the continuation, the persistence of different forms of violence. So we have to talk more about this. I hope that there will be more opportunities, and through this CEAP webinar that we have right now, I'm hoping that more discussions will be triggered by what we have at this morning.
Right. Salamat, Prof. Bing. And Dr. Mira, anything to respond or elaborate on?
Yeah, thank you again. And I do appreciate as I listen to Sister Helen and being that, I mean, like Bing and I work together. So we also know each other, and we know that we do carry the advocacy very strongly. Let me start with that. And I think, just listening to Bing's presentation, and I hope, that students can also be asked to watch that, really to recognize how systemic the problem is. And when we say that, that means systems need to change. It's very hard, very hard. And when we say creating a counterculture, it is also very hard, no? Because culture takes time to evolve. And in our own little schools, I'd say, like even Ateneo as a little school, like in our own part of the world. No? I think the call is, let's try to put that change in. And I think one of the things that parang I can sort of share from our experience in Ateneo is the value of community, and that the surprise, maybe even for me, is discovering that there is a community that wants to change the culture. And once we all came together, we started changing the system. So in the last 2 years, we have also created a new code, which we call the Code and Rules, which expands the meaning of sexual harassment to include what is stated in the Safe Spaces Act, the Bawal Bastos law. So then it has expanded the meaning. It has expanded our I guess my point there is that recognition is so crucial, that we recognize that it's systemic. Then we are called to change the system one day at a time. It's very difficult. It's a very difficult work. And as Sister Helen shared, I think she has the wisdom of also referring to the the history inside the church, and that how that's a system. The church is a system, and so inside even the church as a system, how the church can evolve towards recognizing when it may be blind to women, when it may be blind to marginalized communities, to people marginalized for their sexuality or gender. I think it's again also difficult. Like, I'm just thinking, Father James Martin, he's like, not everybody likes him. He gets haters for being such a strong advocate of love inside the Catholic Church. But
That's
I
ironic.
guess, yes, yeah. But the thing is, even in Ateneo, for me, that's just so the power of love, no, inside the Catholic discourse. I think when Sister Helen was sharing that, we have to remember that when she said, but there are only two, like love God and love each other. So let's just stay with let's. I think that the power of the love discourse is what we can hold on to inside our own small little context.
Yeah. Right. And I suppose, when you gave your presentation, Dr. Mira, it seems like, it really was very impressive, but I'm sure that when you were doing this, you probably encountered a lot of challenges, as you said, within a Catholic school. And most of our viewers today are schools, no, are are coming as Catholic schools here, might want to hear about some of the difficulties you encountered, let's say, and how you overcome them. You know, we do hang on to love because this is what unites us. You know, at least in Miriam College, whenever we find ourselves divided, we focus on, okay, wait, no, where, how are we united? Always, and we always go back to our core values, of course, and but you know, you've gone a long way in the less than 2 years. What you know, what maybe do you think you learned from that experience so far, and that you think would be valuable to the other Catholic schools who are tuned in for our discussion? Like your top three, maybe, learnings from that experience.
Well, I think, well, immediately when you were uh, sort of framing the question, the one thing really I think that was really helpful is to open up conversation and to really create dialogue and to have that space. We always say safe space, no? But always a space where we can hear each other and listen to each other. I think we start with that. We start with listening to each other. And when we open up these spaces for dialogue, even if we may not agree on every, issue, I think we return to what we agree on. And so when we say we wish to practice respect, it's very difficult to argue against respect. When we say we wish to love everyone as God has loved us, it's very difficult to argue against love and the love of God. And so even if we may have differences, we start with that. We anchor on what is shared. But we open spaces for dialogue and conversation. I think sometimes it's more that we fear change. People are so used to how they've been doing things. People have been so used to a particular way of understanding an issue. And sometimes people are afraid to change because they feel that that's not what they're used to. That's not how we do things here in this school. That's not our values. But if we open that space to, can we reflect maybe and see, I think that's where we can start, because I think it's rooted in that fear, the fear that we might be losing things. But to me, the greater fear is, are we not leaving behind people when we fail to care and when we fail to fulfill our moral duty to care. So,
Okay. What do you think, Prof. Bing, coming from your context? You know, I'm still waiting for questions to come in, but I'm sure people are very engaged with our own conversation here. But would you believe we even have someone from Missouri, Illinois? Okay, so we have a lot of people tuned in. Again, we also want to tackle the difficult questions, right? We also want to tackle the challenges. We know that even if we say we want a culture of love, for some reason, that's not as easy as it sounds. It would seem that it should be, especially in a Catholic country and among Catholic schools. But why is it so difficult? And as Dr. Mira pointed out, we're not just Catholic schools that exist in a vacuum. We exist in a broader society. So maybe, Prof. Bing, you said you have done, you shared with us your work outside of the academe also, no, as a social worker. What do you think are the challenges? Sabi mo nga, we have so many laws, no? We have so many laws, yet, and there is a growing consciousness, no? We recognize that Pero bakit, no? There's still this increasing number of gender-based violence. What do you think?
As of course, we're looking at the problem of the GV. We've been talking that it is something that is systemic. It has something to do with the systems. No, so we have put in place policies. We have programs. We have a budget to it. No, but then really, what I'm beginning to see, because it's like a mindset, and then as I presented in my presentation earlier, like the persistence of victim blaming, really, how we relate with those who are survivors of violence. So the program may be there, but how we would treat the survivors, no, and in a way that is not caring, and that prevents and hinder, and that's just one side of the, so in terms of how we deliver services, is there heart to it? And I would ask my social worker friends, how are we, because sometimes you're just, these are just this is just one of the many cases that you handle, no, and losing that, establishing that relationship with them, na kumustahin mo that sometimes we have to be reminded, of that, no. And also in communities, really yung deeply entrenched yung pagtingin doon sa ano dapat ang babae, anong lalaki, and then the persistence of these beliefs, the shoulds, the rules that governs our roles, and has to be continuously challenged, questioned, at creating these safe spaces where we can have a conversation, mga heart-to-heart conversations na we would have, no, kasi kailangan natin talaga na parang honest to goodness na usapan to. Ano bang nangyayari dito? Parang gano'n na, no? So, kasi sometimes we would...
Safe space na conversation.
Safe space siya. Safe space talaga siya na kinds of conversation. And yun nga, the policies may be there, but then the providers are not trained. Hindi naman sila gender responsive, parang yun nga, the heart. We need to, the love really has to be felt, the heart has to be felt. And another area na nakita ko din, Tessa, is, how are we have programs for our victim survivors, but how are we also, what are our programs for our perpetrators, for those who commit gender-based violence, di ba? For example, there was one instance when, di ba, based on the Republic Act 9262, a victim survivor of VAUC can apply for barangay protection order, no, which would allow the woman na kung saan yung husband could be, or the partner could pwede paalisin siya doon sa bahay, no, at hindi siya makakalapit, no. And I asked, so what happens now to these abusers? Where would they go? And the answer is like, well, they have to take care of themselves. But so my response is, if you're not going to take care to deal with that, where would they go? Lilipat lang sila ng bahay. Hanap lang sila ng ibang makakasama, and then the abuse will continue. So I think that's also that has also to be looked into, no? Kailangan tingnan din siya na so the dehumanizing, yung dehumanization that happens should be on both sides, no. And there is also the tendency, to dehumanize the abusers in such a way na hindi nagkakaroon ng mga pag-uusap. I know that there are groups of men ngayon, the men opposed to violence. There is this groups of men who start having these kinds of conversation, and I hope that there would be more conversations, really, that we would be able to mobilize boys and men as allies on putting an end to gender-based violence. So these are some of the mga areas.
That's an important point that you're raising there, Prof. Being I suppose part of that culture of violence does sometimes unnecessarily over-victimize women, and also unnecessarily demonizes, the perpetrator. I shouldn't just say women, no, because like you said, victims of gender-based violence can also be men, many a times, boys also, and girls. Sister, I'm gonna ask, I said we're gonna tackle the difficult questions, you see. So I'm not gonna ask you how we can be more loving or caring. I wanna ask you how do you think we came to stop, to not care? How did you, because you talked about, the love discourse is not just for Catholic schools, it's for the whole of humanity. How did we come, to this, where we have actually a humanity that seems to have stopped caring, to have stopped loving, so to speak, to some extent? It's easy to say, let's start caring, but how did we stop caring, sister? What do you think?
Wow, that's a big question.
That's why it's for
become a
you.
humanity that stops loving? Well, as far as the church goes, we cannot say that it's Catholic love, and maybe that sort of helps the situation in that we claim there's a Catholic way of doing this and that. That's why I said in my paper, I believe it's really a human situation, not only a religious situation. Yeah, and well, we're in a culture that is so oriented toward me and the person, what pleases me. I mean, we just had an experience in the country I come from where we had a president who simply was totally organized and oriented toward himself, publicly and globally. I mean, everybody could see it, and yet he had a following, So whereas the example of our new president is that he's a man who can cry, who weeps, who is passionate, compassionate, and understand. But he suffered. That's part of it also. Suffering seems to open us to others that non-suffering. There's a story in. I don't want to take too much time now, but there's a story in the book of Genesis.
Please.
About Judah, whose two sons married a woman named Tamar, and they both died. And of course, the Jewish law said the next son should marry her. And Judah was not happy to give the third son to her because she was bad luck, it seems. So he did not. And so she, in a very interesting text in the Bible, seduced her father-in-law and became the mother of two sons. Now, that Judah eventually goes down to talk to Joseph and presents a magnificent speech that's in the book of Genesis, where you see that he has changed his way of thinking. He tormented his father when Joseph's bloody coat was brought back, and he did not have compassion. But now he has compassion on his father, who suffered because of the loss of Joseph. It's a beautiful example of what Aviva Zornberg calls knowing the pain of children. He lost two sons, and when you lose two sons, then you can begin to understand how someone feels who has lost someone. So I suppose a lot of that is the reason why, and we have gadgets now that help us be focused on ourselves. Although this lockdown has made us go out and communicate with others through these gadgets. So I don't know, philosophers would have to answer that big question that you asked me. But anyway, that's my effort to give some response.
Thank you, sister. Yeah, I think that was a big response to the big question as well. But don't worry, I will also ask Dr. Mira and Prof. Bing to also reply to that big question. I'm sorry if I'm asking you difficult questions that are probably already at the level of existential or philosophical. But what do you think, Dr. Mira?
I I follow with what Sister Helen has shared. It was a really a perspective of how perhaps people have been so focused on the self, on me, no, the me mentality, which links to that, no, what we see of maybe uh, well, the way we've done our work in the hub is to see where can we create change, and we start with maybe changing the conversation between two people and changing the way they relate to each other. So linking that to what Sister Helen was saying is how we can listen to each other. Like if I want something, to check if the other person also wants it. So checking for a kind of mutuality and checking if like if I do this, would the person be comfortable? And no checking if are you comfortable? So then changing the words, the script, rescripting, because sometimes there's no script that will allow us to listen. There's no script that will allow us to check if the other person is comfortable, if the other person, if you're not crossing a boundary, if you're able to still respect that boundary, if you're not being if you're not violating someone's space, no, for example. So I think that's what we've been trying to do, is to change our scripts, which is part of the discourse in the culture. So how can we encourage relating in that way? That's what we've been trying to do. To be mindful, not just of the self, your own boundaries and your own desires, but also mindful of the other person's boundary, also the other person's desires. No? So that kind of mutuality and that kind of relating. So changing the way people relate to each other, changing the way they talk to each other, and hopefully there we could create a shift so that we can prevent situations that relations lead to violence, ways of relating that lead to violence. That's how we've approached it.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mira. Building on sisters, identifying that the individualism or the individualist culture that we live in seems to really be at that. I mean, it's nice, no? Like I suppose the human rights-based approach is also respectful of the individual, but at the same time, I think both Sister Helen and Dr. Mira are saying it always in relation to the other, right? So we're not also looking for a self-sacrificing individualism. We are wanting to uphold self-love, but in relation to the other. Prof. Bing, what do you think? How can we care more? Or no, not how can we care more? How did we stop caring? Is the question, right?
Okay, I'll follow what what Sister Helen and Doc Mira beautifully answered your big question. For me, yes, it also has something to do with the self. That. But for me, it also has something to the self, but it's about, sometimes our tendency to just simply go through with the motions of life without taking the time to like reflect, to stop and examine, what's going on in us, what's going on around us. And, if we're talking about, attitudes and beliefs, then are we spending enough time to examine how our attitudes, our behavior when we relate with other people, people close to us, strangers we only meet on the streets, how are we relating? Is this something that is characterized by care? So I think we need to take some time to be reflective, no, and to be critically reflective of what's going on. And as I mentioned, as mentioned by Doc Mira, this living in a sense of mutuality, a reciprocity with other people, that it's not only you, it's only your, but knowing that what you do, what you're thinking affect other people, looking that, having that perspective that we are all interconnected, like diba? It if one is pain, every one of us, feel the pain. I think we have to go back to that, no, that sense of empathy, being able to get out of our own little world and opening up and see that, feeling what they are also feeling. I think we need more of that. And the first place is to realize and recognize that at some point we do have, we did have stopped, caring, and just like simply going through with the motions of life and concerned with all the other, and not, getting in touch with who we are as human person, created in the image and likeness of God, no. So for me, that's how I would look at the attempt to respond to your question, the big question. Yeah.
I think Sister Helen also wants to respond now to your response. Sister?
Well, I was just thinking that this patriarchy that we haven't really mentioned today goes way back to ancient society. It wasn't evil, it was just the relationship between men and women, and they had roles to play in society. But today, our consciousness is trying to do away with patriarchy as a kind of culture, but it's still around. And, the Philippines is, prides itself on how it deals with women, but the reality is that that concept is still around. And again, I blame church culture, clericalism, and all of that, because there is this idea of power. Somebody gets ordained and suddenly they have power over people older than them, So I think we need to work very hard within the church to change this patriarchal culture and to really admit that women and men are created equal in the eyes of God, and not just stop at a certain level and say, well, they are up to this point and then they're not anymore. So I think that really contributes, especially in the Philippines, but globally as well, because if the church would take that step, it would influence other people in other cultures. So I think that's my little thought.
Yeah. So you're bringing it back, Sister, to the systemic viewing that we began with. So systemically, we still
it goes
have our
back
institutions.
To the birth of agrarian society. I mean, early cultures where women did the hoeing, the horticultural societies, no problem. And before that, no problem. But along comes agrarian society and the use of the plow, which meant, you look at the Chinese character for man. It's a field of rice with the power to push the plow. So, I mean, it's already within the language, the written language there, We're not in agrarian culture anymore, we're in now the digital culture, and it just requires your ability to be digital. So we're really in an equal setting, but we're not thinking equally yet.
Right. And if I put together what Doc Mira said and what Sister Helen is saying, I guess we're looking for rewriting social scripts. Our social scripts as social institutions, especially those in very, very powerful positions of influence, which I would say includes Catholic schools. We even public schools or non-Catholic schools have Catholics inside them, right? And we are very much a a Catholic country, whether we are studying Catholic schools or not. And so I think they do look to Catholic schools and how are Catholic schools engaging with these issues? And we hope really this love discourse, this care discourse, this respect discourse is something that can be contagious. We have the last few minutes left. And there, again, lots of comments, affirmations. They are enjoying the webinar. My gosh, sister, you have a lot of fans here. That shows your years, Prof. Bing and Doc Mira. We're getting a lot of affirmation. So I think they're listening more. But with our the last 10 minutes or 13 minutes left of our discussion, I guess I want to give it back to you again, like just maybe your parting shots, because I know you've said a lot already, and clearly built on each other's input, but maybe what would you want our viewers, our listeners to take away from this webinar as we close it? I'll begin with Dr. Mira, if that's okay.
Well, I thought if we could just remember that our love for each other and to start there, to start the conversation from that and remembering that each person that we encounter inside our own school setting, how can we care for each and every person? I think that's how I would want to end this conversation. Thank you.
Salamat, Doc Mira. And Prof. Bing?
Thank you. It seems that the work is daunting, ahead of us. It could be overwhelming, but if we could, start with our, as I said, examining our own behavior and how we have internalized all these beliefs and attitudes that we may not have given enough time to reflect on, to examine. And, I think that's the first step, and, be creating this group where you share the same perspective, and sharing to other people, letting them know. And I think very concretely is after this webinar, let's continue talking about the love discourse as a way to a part of creating that counterculture to counter the rape culture that we know it's endemic. It's very much part of permeated our institutions, our families, our schools, church, the media. So every act that we could do, we could trigger certain conversations about this issue, would go a long way in slowly eroding this system that continue to perpetuate gender-based violence committed against women, boys, LGBTQI. So I hope that this would not be the end of this. There's much work to be done, and it cannot be. We can only put an end to it if we really come together as one and collectively deal with this with this issue. So salamat.
Salamat, Prof. Bing. And Sister Helen, your parting words?
Well, I'd like to thank CEAP for having such a webinar. I'm very happy about it, and happy also that I was able to take part in it a little bit. And yes, we need to rethink our thinking in Catholic schools. So I think people out there who are listening are in Catholic schools mostly, and we need to think about how we do things in Catholic schools, and not just focus so much on being Catholic schools, but sort of go out of our comfort zone, you might say. We are a country that has Muslims. How do we relate to our Muslim community we have a very small Jewish community, extremely small, but the Muslim community has suffered a lot, and we don't seem to reach out to them too much, especially those of you who are in Catholic schools in Mindanao. And there is, what do you call it, bigotry against Muslims in many Catholic circles. So I think those kind of things where we yes, we're Catholic, but Catholic is universal. That's the basic meaning of that word. So not to be so focused on ourselves, but to move out and understand there are cultures out there that have something to offer us also. And because that kind of listening and awareness, not only within the gender situation, but out in terms of different cultures. And we're in Asia, which is really awash with culture and different religious cultures. And interreligious dialogue is such an important, talking about dialogue, interreligious dialogue is so important. So I just hope we will go beyond our comfort zone and a little school beyond and continue this conversation outside of the Catholic circle.
Thank you, sister. Yes, it's not easy, right? Having these conversations, discomforting conversations, but are usually the most meaningful. So maybe I just want to thank you all again, our panel of speakers. My own note here in terms of the, where we have difficulty in strengthening the love discourse to end gender-based violence I have here is when, according to our discussion, when we are as individuals or even as a school or as a community become too individualistic, or when we are also, according to our discussion, when we lose connection with others, either as individuals, as schools, or communities, or social institutions. And again, as you all said, when we as individuals, schools, communities, and social institutions are not reflective enough, are not mindful enough about our own interactions. And you all have called for really dialogue, for ongoing conversation and dialogue that does not begin or end with this webinar. So maraming salamat sa inyong lahat, and maraming salamat din to our listeners, our viewers. I will now go back to my script, if that's okay with everyone. Okay, because we have here actually reminders again, once again, that before we end, we really have to thank once again, the Private Education Assistance Committee, or PAYAC, and RAXO CT, our web host, for being our wonderful partners for this webinar. I also want to say that on behalf of the CEAP President, Sister Marisa Viri, and the CEAP Board of Trustees, Father Iking Balonga, and the Program Committee Chairs, and the JEEPGY champions, one of which I am one of those champions. In particular, I was boxed into gender equality, but I would like to think I'm a champion of all the advocacies under JEEPGY. Also, Mr. Jose Alan Arellano, and the Executive Director, and who is the Executive Director and National Secretariat. Maraming salamat po to all of our listeners and our viewers, and I hope you will go with love. Now, I told you that this is our last webinar, so for the whole of the 2021 JEEPGY conference. So being the last webinar moderator, I get the honor of introducing the head of our JEEPGY group to give the closing remarks. He needs no introduction, but we, the champions of JEEPGY, I would like to introduce him the way we see him, the way we know him, and that is confidently handsome, with a heart for democracy, for advocacy and democracy. So without further ado, please welcome for the closing remarks, our beloved Father Iking.
Thank you, Doc Tessa. The Philippine Catholic School Standards for Basic Education, particularly in Standard 3, emphasizes that an excellent Catholic school is impelled by a mission to proclaim, give witness, and transmit the Christian faith with new methods, new expressions, and new fervor towards a transformed society and a new way of being church. More concretely, PCSS in Benchmark 3.1 calls on the school community to actively collaborate with the local church in addressing local, regional, national, and global issues to promote justice and peace, care for creation, love for one's country, gender sensitivity, and responsible use of all forms of media, among others. In Standard 4, an excellent Catholic school is called to be faithful to the church preferential option for the poor and demonstrates its fidelity through actions that favor the deprived sectors of society. 3 benchmarks under this standard, 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3, further unpack a Catholic school's mission for the poor, where pro-poor programs are clearly defined and stipulated. Standards 3 and 4 and benchmarks 3.1, 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3 provide us with principles through which a roadmap for the pillars of transformative education can be pursued by the Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines. CEAP is gifted to give. What CEAP can give on the occasion of its 80th and beyond, and on the occasion of the 500th year of the presence of Christianity in the Philippines and beyond, are transformative programs in justice and peace, ecological integrity, engaged citizenship, poverty reduction, gender sensitivity, and youth empowerment, using various platforms, primarily Catholic mass media. As a result, we hope and pray that we see a world transformed and a church renewed. We have come to the end of our observance of Catholic Schools Week 2021. Our work, however, continues. Using JEEPGY National Conference 2021 as springboard, we shall advocate in the coming months critical and emerging issues that deserve CEAP's attention, action, programming, and modeling. 1. We shall see how and where we can promote carbon neutrality to pursue the ideals of Laudato Si. 2. We shall review as well school structures and culture and find out how non-violence is promoted not only in a school's curriculum but also in a school's way of life and spirituality. 3. We shall engage small and big schools in pro-poor programs. St. John Paul II, as echoed by the Second Plenary Council of the Philippines, said it well. Nobody is so poor, he has nothing to give. And nobody is so rich, he has nothing to receive. 4. We shall continue to assist schools carry out their work of formation through online recollections and retreats and responsible use of media despite the limitations brought about by the pandemic. 5. We shall push for quality Catholic education as this is the best tool that can be used in our walk towards engaged citizenship, not only in seasonal voters' education. 6. We shall continue forming our youth to truly embrace the real meaning of respect, dignity, and charity, as beautifully elaborated this morning in our session. Quoting St. Thomas Aquinas, Pope Francis in his 3rd encyclical Fratelli Tutti describes love made possible by God's grace as a movement towards another, whereby we consider the beloved as someone united to ourselves. All our programs in JEEPGY are aimed at working for the common good. May each one of us work in the same spirit as well, so that finally God's kingdom may once again reign in our midst. Thank you for all your support to the JEEPGY National Conference 2021. Have a wonderful week ahead. God bless you all.
Sa ikaw at ako,
natuto sa prinsipyong
punyo at serbisyong totoo.
kahalintulad ni Kristo,
Isang puwarang Katoliko. Pagkakaisa
sa tulong at gawa,
masasalamat,
alaala,
pagbabago,
ang misyon sa mundo,
magagawa sa biyaya ni Kristo.
ang kabataan,
May hamon at alay,
sa ating bayan,
maging lingkod at tulad
ng pagbabago,
sa misyon sa mundo. Birhen Maria ang gabay at ang modelo. Sa mundong may bagong anyo, isang bansang may bagong sigla. Dahil sa ikaw at ako, natuto sa prinsipyong punyo at serbisyong totoo. Kahalintulad ni Kristo.